You know, I've been around for a while. Met some interesting people. Done some crazy things. So you just might think that there's not much that can take me by surprise. You'd be wrong. The world is full of stories, science and things that amaze and confound me. Every single day, incredible mysteries that keep me awake at night. Some I can answer. Others just defy logic.
Is the end of the world upon us? In Wyoming, a deadly force is sleeping underneath Yellowstone National Park. Could it awake and destroy the planet?
It could happen today. It could happen tomorrow. It's a race against time.
In Alabama, a NASA scientist makes a remarkable discovery. Is a killer solar storm coming our way?
If it were hit today, would knock us out, would knock civilization to its knees.
And across the world comes the threat of an invasion by robots. Could the Terminator be real?
Yeah. It's a weird world, and I love it. You believe in prophecies? Some of the biggest events in history have been foreseen by some of the greatest minds. Nostradamus predicted World War I, Hitler, Napoleon, the election of U.S. President Barack Obama, and the atomic destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. How did he do that? And why can't I do that? Were they simply lucky guesses? Can we somehow see with incredible accuracy what will happen hundreds or perhaps thousands of years into the future? And if we can, do we really want to know what's coming?
Patrick Jarrell is an astronomer. In 1996, he did something extraordinary. He devoted his life to studying the complex and mysterious texts of the ancient Mayans. What he found is now the stuff of Hollywood. The world is coming to an end, and soon.
What captivated me the most after reading the Mayan prophecies was that they calculated this huge cataclysm at the end of 2012. And this was very disturbing information for me. I said, wow, gee, my whole future and the whole future of everybody will be destroyed in a few years. What am I going to do? And that changed my whole life. Before 1996, I planned to become the oldest person in the world by following a long living diet. In the morning, 1.5 liter orange juice, in the midday, 7 steamed bananas, and in the evening, rice with 1 kilo vegetables and 2 egg yolks.
But knowing when the world would end wasn't enough. Patrick had to know how it would happen. For the next 2 years, using complex mathematical formulas, he set out to decode the Mayans' hidden messages.
I was immediately grasped by the fact that they had very high accuracy and that they were able to calculate something very spectacular into the future. And it took me several years to decode it, but I found what will happen in 2012.
What did Patrick find? Is it an asteroid? Nuclear war? How will the world end? Jarrell believes on December 12th, 2012, a sleeping giant will awake.
The supervolcano will erupt, and that will destroy completely our civilization.
There are at least 7 known supervolcanoes on Earth. They contain massive amounts of molten rock, which is trapped inside them below the Earth's crust. The pressure builds until finally it bursts, exploding in a catastrophic eruption thousands of times more powerful than a regular volcano. The last eruption occurred over 70,000 years ago. Could one of these giants be a threat to us now? Remarkably, the answer could be yes. And it's underneath Yellowstone National Park. Over 2 million tourists visit Yellowstone every year. Little do they know that under the surface lies one of the deadliest forces on the planet. Incredibly, this sleeping supervolcano may be coming to life. In 2004, scientists detected the ground starting to bulge around Yellowstone. Soon after, over 1,000 mini-earthquakes occurred there in just a few months. Some dismiss it, but others say it can only mean one thing.
The scientists that are saying that, well, the rumbling at Yellowstone Park, that is normal, well, they don't know what the Maya knew. The rotation from the Earth will change. Once the inner core of the Earth starts moving on its head, then the lava that is around the inner core will be pushed also very sharply to the crust. And we will have an eruption of the Yellowstone at the end of 2012.
Did Patrick Jarrell unlock the Mayan secret? Is the Yellowstone supervolcano about to erupt? And could it mean the end of the world? Robert Vicino is an entrepreneur and survivalist. He's not waiting to find out.
If you thought Mount St. Helens was something to see, wait till you see Yellowstone go.
In 2003, Robert decided that there was only one way to survive the blast of a supervolcano: by building volcano-proof bunkers all over America.
It's a race against time to get our shelters built. You could say it isn't so and ignore the possibilities, but it's not going to make it go away.
Made of concrete and steel, these self-contained bunkers are buried underground. They can house up to 1,000 people and store enough food for a year. But who is going to use them?
We have about 10,000 members currently signed up from all over the world. After the Japan quake, we had a spike. I think we received 600-700 people in one day. So the awareness is going up. You know, as my prediction is, if we're still here a year from now, in early 2012, we're going to have a line. People are going to be waiting in line, begging to get in, and it'll be too late. When I first mentioned it to people, they thought it was crazy. I found that the reactions have changed in the last year, and even more specifically, this year, 2011. Now they're really wanting to know, where is it, and how big are they, and how do we get in, and how much does it cost? Because I think people are starting to realize it's coming. And it may be coming sooner than we think. You know, something interesting, and I just heard this today. Somebody advised me that, you know, the Mayan calendar talks about or we believe it ends on December 21st, 2012. And a lot of people say, well, so what, it ends, it's going to restart. And there's no proof of anything, and that's not what they meant, that the world was going to end. What I heard this morning was, 15 years ago, the common interpretation of the calendar was that it would end on December 24th, 2011. So it's closer than we think.
Could Vicino and his friends someday be the only surviving members of the human race?
If Yellowstone blows, you're looking at a life extinction event. The only parties that are going to survive are those that are underground. It could happen today, it could happen tomorrow. I think the Mayans knew something. How they knew, I don't know. Were they informed by some other culture? Did they know? Were they able to see into the future? Were they able to calculate the patterns of the solar system in the heavens to know when the alignments are going to happen, and when this happens, that'll happen? Did they exist in the last go around 3,600 years ago? Or did somebody tell them?
Does this survivalist know something we don't? Whatever the truth is, he's taking no chances.
I don't know what inspired Noah, but I would imagine he was as passionate about what he was doing as I am.
Are Robert Vicino and Patrick Gerald simply prophets of doom? Or could they be right? Will a supervolcano cause the end of the world?
Crazy, isn't it? I mean, if you listen to every doomsday prediction, prophecy, or conspiracy theory, you'd never leave the house, right? I mean, what is it with these people? Do they think that just because they say a giant volcano is going to rip through this planet and wipe us out, that we're going to believe them? I don't believe a word they say. I'm just being careful.
A man decoding the texts of the ancient Mayans uncovers an astonishing prophecy. Will a supervolcano at Yellowstone destroy our planet? Stanley Ambrose is an anthropologist. He thinks we have reason to believe it might.
I suppose if you really wanted to stay around in a place that was struck by an apocalypse, that would be a good idea. I'd rather move.
A lifetime spent studying supervolcanoes has convinced Ambrose they are a force to be feared.
If Yellowstone blows, it would eject a huge amount of dust and gases up to 50 kilometers into the stratosphere. We have to fear global famine. We can imagine complete loss of crop production for decades to centuries.
In 1980, Mount St. Helens erupted in Washington state, sending volcanic ash over 10 kilometers into the air. Ambrose thinks this massive eruption would be dwarfed by Yellowstone. Could humans survive this kind of catastrophic explosion? We may know the answer because it's already happened.
The volcanic eruption of Toba stands among the most explosive and largest in Earth history.
Around 70,000 years ago, a supervolcano exploded at Toba in Indonesia. It was so powerful, it left a crater 100 kilometers long, still visible today.
Volcanic ash rained down over an area larger than the size of the United States. That's big. The Earth was surrounded by this thick blanket of sulfuric acid haze. The sun weakened. Much solar energy was reflected back into outer space. The landscape around the world was basically devegetated. If you lived anywhere from Southeast Asia across to India and Pakistan, the land would have been covered with a very, very fine white dust. That's the volcanic ash. And it is really fine and it is really white. And like snow, it reflects sunlight off of the land surface. Unlike snow, it didn't melt. It had to be washed away by the rains whenever the rains occurred. And that doesn't seem to have been very often. It's a global shock to the world system, what I call an instant ice age.
Before the eruption at Toba, the Earth was home to a healthy population of humans. Ambrose believes we can judge our fate by looking at what happened to them.
The volcanic eruption caused a population crash unlike any that had been seen previously in human history. And during the next 10,000 years, there were very few archaeological traces of humans.
Did a supervolcano take us to the brink of extinction? Could Yellowstone do the same now?
Everything within the blast zone would be buried. There would probably be general infrastructure failure. Agricultural production would, of course, be hammered. The United States would lose its entire grain belt. And if the whole world got cold the way it did with Toba, then there would be few choices of where to go to get food.
It's an alarming scenario. Should we heed the warning? Is the Yellowstone supervolcano ready to blow.
Sometimes it's bulging up like it's going to explode. Then these bulges go back down. One of these bulges coming up is not going to go back down. The pressure just might continue increasing. And that's when it's time to head for the hills.
Could Stanley Ambrose be right? Are billions of people in imminent danger of death by supervolcano? Jake Lowenster is the chief scientist at the Yellowstone Volcano Observatory.
It's my job to worry about whether Yellowstone's going to erupt.
Jake studied the supervolcano's behavior. He believes it's not a monster, but a pussycat.
People talk about impending doom because they know there have been eruptions in Yellowstone's past. There have been very, very large eruptions at Yellowstone, the size eruptions that people will call super eruptions. One of the things that you'll hear about when people talk about Yellowstone is somehow that it's overdue. And they throw out this number of 600,000 years for an interval between these large eruptions. Well, that number is pretty much taken out of nowhere. If you did the math on those three big eruptions at Yellowstone, the number for the interval would be about 730,000 years. Of course, the last eruption was 640,000 years. So the number 600,000 is more appealing if you're trying to build the case that somehow it's overdue. But second of all, here you're doing statistics based on a sample population of 2, the interval between the first and the second and third large eruption at Yellowstone. Sample population of 2, not very big, not really statistically meaningful to talk about how often big eruptions occur at Yellowstone. And finally, in terms of this, there's no guarantee that Yellowstone will have another one of these super eruptions. Volcanoes have life cycles. They're born, they live their lives, they die. There are very few places that we can point to around the world that have had more than 3 very large eruptions. There is a remote possibility of those eruptions in the future. It's just a question of whether the kind of activity we're seeing now actually forecasts that anything is in the offing. But there's no reason to expect a big eruption at Yellowstone within our lifetime, which doesn't seem very worrying to me.
Why is Jake so sure? He thinks there is something the prophets of doom have overlooked.
Well, the way that Yellowstone has erupted most of the time is through these smaller lava flows, which are similar to those that happen in Hawaii, which, as you can imagine, would be locally very interesting, but not an international problem.
In the last 2 million years, the Yellowstone supervolcano has had 3 giant eruptions. Jake believes a crucial fact is preventing another one. Yellowstone erupts all the time, but on such a tiny scale, it produces nothing but harmless flows of lava.
Lava flows can block roads, forest fires might start, but they sort of roll very slowly across the ground, and you could generally outrun them very easily, so they're not very damaging events.
Far from causing a disaster, Jake thinks these lava flows are keeping a lid on the sleeping giant.
Anytime that you're having a volcanic eruption, you're removing pressure on the magma chamber. It seems to be relatively commonplace for Yellowstone to have this kind of activity.
Are many eruptions at Yellowstone keeping us safe from the supervolcano? Do they explain its recent rumblings?
Around 2009, 2010, we had a couple earthquake swarms. In a swarm, you have a number of medium-sized earthquakes, and they happen all in one particular location. They were among the larger ones that we've had.
But what caused the quakes? Scientists believe magma is flowing into the volcanic chamber, pushing up the crust. Is this a sign of an impending giant eruption?
There was about 25 centimeters or 10 inches, something like this, of uplift at Yellowstone. Between 1925 and 1975, it rose about 3 times that amount. So that uplift doesn't, in particular, seem very worrying to me. The kinds of activity we're seeing are the kind of activity that clearly has been going on for hundreds and even thousands of years.
Even if Jake is right, there's another burning question. Why are some people certain, the Yellowstone supervolcano will erupt in 2012.
I think there's a subset of the population out there that just likes to be scared in a way. They like to come up with things that kind of stir the pot, but there's no clock beneath volcanoes that tells them when to erupt. Based on the information that we're seeing, there's no guarantee that Yellowstone will ever have another one of these super eruptions.
Were the ancient Mayans right? Will a supervolcano wipe out the human race in the greatest mass extinction since the Big Bang? Or is Yellowstone's sleeping giant nothing more than a harmless firecracker? Weird, or what?
Everywhere you look, our planet is teeming with life. Whether a single-celled amoeba, a snail, or incredibly complex organisms and species like us. But all life forms on Earth have one thing in common. Our very existence depends upon, in fact, is at the mercy of just one thing. If it's in trouble, then there's trouble for all of us.
They say you shouldn't stare directly into the sun. But for over 3 decades, NASA scientist David Hathaway has done exactly that. In 2005, he noticed something very strange.
It was a little unexpected by many of us, myself included.
Hathaway was tracking sunspots in giant regions of intense magnetic activity that occur on the surface of the sun. But the greatest danger to our planet is what explodes out of them: solar flares.
Solar flares can blast material off of the sun, a million miles an hour.
With a force of 10 billion atomic bombs, solar flares catapult billions of tons of red-hot plasma into space and sometimes directly at Earth.
When it strikes the Earth, can shake the Earth's magnetic field, does some spectacular things like produce aurora borealis, can also do things to our technology in particular. Solar flares can cause satellites to deorbit and ultimately re-enter the Earth's atmosphere and burn up, so you literally lose the satellite.
Solar flares and sunspots occur in regular cycles, but in 2008, Hathaway discovered something remarkable. Suddenly, they appeared to mysteriously stop.
We're seeing a sunspot cycle, the smallest we've seen in at least 100 years or perhaps 200 years. We didn't see sunspots for literally months at a time. That had us a little surprised.
Some scientists believe the change in the sunspot cycles is the calm before an unprecedented solar storm. A wave of solar flares so destructive, scientists call it Space Katrina. But now, other ominous signs suggest the sun could be waking from its deep slumber.
We've gone from no sunspots to 20 or 30 sunspots on the sun on a given day now. We've also seen the number of flares increase.
Is there something wrong with the star that gives life to all things on Earth?
We've had some fairly wild predictions. We've got to go way back. You've got to go back to the 1600s to find the sun misbehaving or acting as weirdly as it is now.
Is our sun preparing to launch the biggest solar storm in history? A NASA scientist discovers strange activity in solar flares on the surface of the sun. Could a giant solar storm be coming our way? Or is there another explanation for the sun's weird behavior? Nassim Haramein is a scientist. He believes he has the answer. In 2009, he made a remarkable discovery when viewing images taken by a NASA satellite.
What I noticed is when I was looking at this, first of all, we see two objects appear. Those two objects seem to have moved together and have moved across the frame. What's strange about this particular sequence is that when you follow this object, they make almost a 90-degree angle turn and then entering the sun.
NASA claimed the objects were simply comets or glitches. But when Nassim studied them more closely, he came to an amazing conclusion.
And when I started to see these objects, I couldn't believe my eyes. They were immense. I mean, they only look like little dots on the data, but a little dot beside the sun means that the object's almost the size of the Earth.
Planet-size objects entering the sun. Had Nassim found something extraordinary that even NASA had missed? He thinks there's only one explanation.
I believe these objects may be intergalactic ships from advanced civilization. They appear to be under intelligent control. They don't appear to act in a natural way that you would expect from, you know, cosmological objects like comets and meteorites and so on. It may sound completely outrageous, but imagine a civilization that's like thousands, if not millions of years ahead of us. Look at what we did in 150 years of advanced technology. We went from like literally horse and buggy to having rockets that are going to the moon and space shuttle and space stations and all this in 150 years. Imagine if we had 1,000 years of advancements in technology or 1,000,000 years in advancement. What would our ships look like? Well, they might be the size of planets.
Could this explain the sun's odd behavior? Are changes in its sunspot and solar flare activity being caused by alien ships?
The solar flare appears to emanate right after the objects impact the sun. To me, clear that the two are absolutely related, and the sun flare is most likely the shock wave resulting from the penetration of the objects through the surface of the sun.
Alien spacecraft deliberately crashing into the sun. It's an incredible theory, but why would they do it? According to Nassim, the answer lies in the astronomical records of the ancient Egyptians.
When I looked at all the data around the world from all these civilizations, they all talked about the sun gods. When you looked at these texts and the way they described them, they talked about the sun gods using the sun as a gateway. If you were an advanced civilization, and here I'm talking about a very advanced civilization, you could maybe enter and then come out at any other point in the universe. To me, after all these years, it has really become, you know, a fact of life. And I'm, you know, not surprised anymore when people come up to me and say, you know, when I was 10, I saw this object in the sky, or, you know, a few months ago, I saw this amazing, you know, object that could not be a plane and all this stuff. You know, it's so common. So many people have seen it. And now there is governments that are releasing files that, you know, from the military facilities, from extremely credible, you know, sources. You're talking generals and all sorts of high-level military personnel coming forward, talking about this activity around the world. There is true phenomenon occurring that has to do with UFO activity and extraterrestrial activity, supporting this idea that maybe the sun gods are on their way back.
Is our sun part of an intergalactic highway being used by alien traffic? Are they responsible for disrupting its natural cycles and threatening the Earth?
Now, we did some pretty strange things on the Enterprise, but this is weird or what? Let me see if I got this straight. NASA scientists say our sun's sunspot cycles are behaving weirdly, and this could cause a giant killer solar flare to head towards Earth, right? While another guy, Nassim, thinks that there's something else causing these solar flares. He thinks aliens in spaceships the size of the Earth are crashing in and out of the sun, wreaking havoc. Nassim's theory seems crazy, right? Or is it?
Our sun is acting like an oddball. Are its natural cycles being disrupted by giant UFOs? Is a fatal solar storm on its way to Earth? NASA researcher David Hathaway has an explanation that's far more down to earth. He thinks we have nothing to worry about.
This recent sunspot cycle has started later than expected, and I think I understand it. The sunspot cycle is caused by magnetic fields. It's those magnetic fields that make the sunspots. And we've known for decades that it's the flows within the sun that take those magnetic fields, amplify them, and produce sunspots every 11 years. But the devil is in the details. Exactly what flows are there inside the sun that do this? What are the structure of those flows? And we're getting a better handle on that, but we're still not quite there yet. That we still really haven't got a model for how the sun does this, where we can take the equations and march them forward in time the way a meteorologist might do with the equations for flows on in the Earth's atmosphere.
The sun's magnetic fields violently swirl around the surface like powerful ocean currents. They produce sunspots and solar flares until finally something bizarre happens.
The sun's magnetic field flips.
Every 11 years, the sun's magnetic poles do a backflip. Scientists believe this causes a dramatic decrease in sunspot and solar flare activity. But does it threaten us now?
We had weak magnetic fields produced on the surface of the sun during the last sunspot cycle. Because they were weak, we'll survive this without any major inconvenience.
The end of the worlders almost certainly have it wrong. The timing's just way off.
We may be safe for the moment, but could a mega solar storm hit us in the future? And what would happen if it did? Lawrence Joseph is a science journalist.
If a solar storm hit today, would knock us out, would knock civilization to its knees without any exaggeration.
How? An historical event could provide the answer. On September 1st, 1859, British astronomer Richard Carrington was looking through his telescope when a giant solar flare exploded onto the Earth.
It caused the northern lights to dance down to the equator. You could read a book at midnight outside because of the incredible radiation. The Carrington event caused some fires in telegraph offices and caused some disruption. But basically, it didn't inflict great damage.
Why didn't this massive flare destroy us?
There was no power grid holding society together. There was no telecom. There was none of the things that we've come to rely upon existed back then.
Joseph believes that if a similar solar flare hit us today, our massive reliance on electricity would be our downfall.
We're talking a blackout that could last months or years, could cover half to 2/3 of the continent. After a month, I can't really see anything but anarchy or the beginning of it. It's the paradox of progress, I call it. We have become more vulnerable to these storms, and the storms are headed our way. I mean, the shields are down, Scotty.
In 1989, a small solar flare knocked out the Quebec power grid and left 6 million people without power in the dead of winter. Joseph believes a giant flare would destroy every power grid on the planet. No electricity means no food.
I'm damn concerned people would really begin to die off in large numbers. So what are you going to do? We don't know. I mean, people go head for the hills. Well, what are you going to do in the hills? I don't know what to do in the hills. Most people don't.
Have our advances in technology made us vulnerable to a super solar storm? Is the sun's mysterious behavior natural, or are aliens to blame? Weird, or what? A world-renowned inventor makes an astonishing prediction.
20 years from now, computers will be operating fully at human levels.
Are we facing an uprising of killer machines? Could the Terminator be real?
It's incredible, isn't it? If we were to believe the ancient prophecies, or our modern-day doomsday theorists, or even some of our best scientists, then not only is the end of the world going to happen, but there's lots of ways that nature could destroy us. And none of them are nice. But what if they're all wrong? What if the thing that will wipe us out has nothing to do with volcanoes or solar storms? Or what if there's something, aside from nuclear weapons, of course, that we've created that's an even bigger threat? Weird. Or what?
In 1984, Hollywood gave the world a futuristic science fiction blockbuster. The story of a cyborg assassin sent back in time from 2029. The Terminator posed a remarkable question. Could robots take over and destroy us? Nearly 3 decades later, we may have the answer. Ray Kurzweil is a world-renowned inventor and futurist. He believes science fiction will become reality sooner than we think.
In the last 15 years, we've seen millions-fold improvement in the power of computers. And this is not just an idle speculation about the future, that's what we've seen. 20 years from now, computers will be operating fully at human levels.
It's an extraordinary theory based on an extraordinary fact. Today's computers are 100 billion times more powerful than they were a century ago. And their power is growing. Kurzweil believes they are rapidly catching us.
Computers already exceed humans at logical thinking, like playing games. There are robotic cars with artificial intelligence that are driving without human drivers. A computer today can look at an electrocardiogram and diagnose it with the accuracy of doctors. And that's something that wasn't feasible even a couple of years ago. So things are moving more and more quickly.
Are we experiencing the rise of the machines? Are our PCs more than simply harmless pieces of plastic and metal?
They'll continue to grow exponentially in the basic hardware power, more than doubling in power every year. We'll get to human levels of intelligence in a machine by my estimates around 2029.
Wait a minute, what did you say?
We'll get to human levels of intelligence in a machine by my estimates around 2029.
2029 is the year from which the Terminator made its return. Will machines equal, then surpass our brain power in just 20 years? Incredibly, Kurzweil believes it won't end there.
By my calculations, when we get to around 2045, we will have multiplied the intelligence of our human-machine civilization 1 billion-fold by merging with this intelligent technology we're creating. That will be such a profound, singular transformation when we can actually vastly multiply our own intelligence.
Will man and machine merge before the middle of this century? And if so, what does it mean for us?
It's not an invasion, from another planet. And people say, oh, we'll lose our humanity. In my mind, that is our humanity. That's part of who we are. Our computers, our technology is part of the human civilization. So we will transcend our biology, not our humanity. I believe we will embody our human values in these machines. They're part of human civilization already. I don't like the term transhumanism because it implies that we're going to transcend our humanity. I think the goal, anyway, is to keep our humanity and transcend the limitations of our biology. And that's not a new story. If we hadn't done that, human life expectancy would still be 23, which is what it was 1,000 years ago.
Could our world end not by natural disaster, but with humankind simply becoming obsolete? John Leslie is a professor of philosophy at the University of Guelph in Canada.
It could be in the next 20, 30 years, we have computers which are more intelligent than humans and which take over control over our lives. And there's an obvious possibility there that things could go badly wrong.
John believes that far from advancing humanity, creating uber-intelligent robots and computers could backfire on all of us.
If robots became super intelligent, they could well have very little interest in the human race. They could think of themselves as superior humans and look on us in the same way as we look on ants. And the machine could come to the answer, let's get rid of biological humans and put machines in place of them.
Are the machines we've created going to turn on us and take over our planet? Is Hollywood right?
You have to remember that the science fiction of today quite often turns out to be the science fact of tomorrow.
According to John, it's not only Terminators that pose a very real threat to our survival.
In fact, one of the dangers here is that it may be that computers are in charge of the system which controls nuclear bombs. We simply don't know to what extent they are in charge of the destructive forces.
Could a machine deliberately trigger a nuclear holocaust? It's a terrifying scenario. But Leslie has an even more frightening theory. The ultimate threat to the human race is already in our homes.
You could argue that the internet is, at present, a gigantic computer, and that its intelligence far exceeds the intelligence of any individual human. Certainly the amount of knowledge you can get very, very rapidly on the internet is much bigger than you could get by consulting the greatest memory experts. I believe that the future of the internet is pretty certainly going to push it in the direction of more and more intelligence.
Every day, over 2 billion people log on to the internet. It connects most of the world's computers and databases, moving information around the planet. John believes the internet could evolve into a central brain that leads a cybernetic revolt against mankind.
It could become immensely intelligent and become, therefore, what takes over world government and possibly then decides that humans are irrelevant and gets rid of them. That's just one way in which we could be annihilated almost immediately.
Will robots blow us up with our own nuclear weapons? Is the internet going to destroy us? Will man be enslaved by machines?
You know, I never thought machines were that smart. I mean, most of the gadgets I have are incapable of doing anything useful at all, let alone reciting Shakespeare. But if we believe what some of the world's greatest minds are telling us, these things we've created are going to take us over, blow us up with our own weapons.
and enslave us for the rest of time. Could that be possible? Not today, my friends. Leading scientists believe machines are becoming so intelligent that they will overtake humans by 2050. Will they become Terminators and annihilate us? Noel Sharkey is a professor of artificial intelligence and robotics at the University of Sheffield, England. He says, we have nothing to worry about.
We're really a long way off at the moment of creating the kind of technology you see in the likes of the Terminator, with big humanoid robots armed with machine guns plodding across the battlefield.
Some of the world's greatest minds disagree, but Sharkey believes they haven't asked one simple question. Why?
And as a scientist, I need evidence, and there's no evidence of any kind of really smart intelligence or any kind of desire, or robots would have a desire to take over the world, any more than a washing machine would want to take over the world.
Not only does Sharkey think that machines aren't a threat, but they're not nearly as smart as we make them out to be.
A lot of people talk about artificial intelligence at the moment being at the level of the rat or the slug, and it's going to get so much smarter and be like the human later. But for me, I've studied animals all my life, really, and I would say that current robots weren't at the intelligence of a bacteria, because bacteria can feed themselves and they know how to survive. Robots don't. They're dependent on me. And essentially, they're not bright enough to be called stupid.
But even if robots and computers are nothing more than digital dummies, couldn't someone use them for evil rather than good?
Well, the problem is that robots are very limited in what they can do. You just program a robot, but it's all up to what the programmer puts in there. There's no reason why the robot themselves would do anything that we haven't told them to do. And I certainly wouldn't be programming a robot to tell it to take over the world, and I don't think anybody else would.
Instead of creatures with a superintelligence that surpasses humans, Sharkey thinks machines are our moronic slaves that lack the one essential ingredient for a robot-led Armageddon: human emotion.
We have consciousness, and we use that in our everyday lives, in our thought, in our desires. Whereas robots have a really rigid silicon intelligence, no desires, no wants.
But if robots have neither the brains nor the drive for world domination, why do so many others believe it will happen?
The whole idea of a robot takeover is quite odd, and it's really the subject of science fiction. Right back since the word was invented in 1921, all science fiction movies have been about robots killing humans and taking over the world. But it is, as it says, fiction. One of my big concerns at the minute is that there are 43 countries worldwide that are developing military robots. And one of the problems is the military seem to have this idea, science fiction idea of robots, that they could be that kind, have that kind of intelligence. But in actual fact, they can't tell the difference between a soldier and a civilian. And so a lot of people will die. But it won't be through the intentions of robots. It'll be through the misuse by humans of a dangerous weapon.
Are robots just mindless heaps of metal? Or will man and machine merge and destroy the human race? We'll just have to wait and find out. Weird or what? So there we have it. Doomsday stories from the Earth and beyond. In Wyoming, a deadly supervolcano lies dormant. Will it explode in 2012 and fulfill a Mayan prophecy? In Alabama, a NASA scientist discovers the unthinkable. A giant solar storm could be on its way to destroy the Earth. And one of the world's greatest minds makes a startling prediction. Man and machine will merge by 2050. Will robots take over? Are we facing a Terminator Armageddon? Are these stories evidence that the end of the world is nigh? Can we dismiss those who claim these things are true? You decide.
Join me again next time for more stories that will undoubtedly be weird or what?